Today's lesson is about economies of scale and how they affect a company's per unit or average costs. The good or service I'll be using to illustrate the basic principle is Duff Beer. The company producing Duff Beer is in business to make a profit. That means they want to produce the beer at the lowest possible cost and sell it at the highest possible price. They have to balance demand and costs. As long as there are people like Homer Simpson,
beer,
and Barney Gumble,
I can't take this much longer. I gotta have a beer.
the company can be sure there'll be sufficient demand for their product. The company can use advertising to make sure demand is sufficiently high.
Oh yeah!
In order to produce beer, the Duff Company needs resources, and resources include land. Here's the land the Duff Brewery is built on. Resources include capital. Capital is the equipment, like these big tanks that are used to produce the beer. And the company also needs labor. Here are some of the workers at the Duff factory. So here's a list of the resources used by the Duff Company. Let's say to begin with, the company builds a small brewery using just 2 acres of land, on which it has to pay $1,200 a month, $1,200 a week rent. It uses 40 workers in its brewery, and it pays the workers $20,000 a week. It uses $5 million worth of capital equipment, and that capital equipment costs the company $6,000 a week in interest. The company's total cost to make its beer is the sum of the land costs, the labor costs, and the capital costs. The total cost to make beer at Duff Brewery per week, $27,600. Let's assume that if they use that amount of resources, they're able to make 40,000 bottles of beer. What's the average cost of producing the beer? The average, or per unit cost, is the total cost divided by the quantity. Average cost of a bottle of beer with this size factory would be 68 cents a bottle. That's the total cost, 27,200 divided by the quantity of beer produced, 40,000 bottles. Well, suppose the Duff Brewery decides to expand its operation using more land, more labor, and more capital. In order to sell the additional beer they produce, they would have to increase their advertising.
Oh yeah!
So that merchants like Mo Sislak
Hey, if you guys are getting loaded off them fumes, I'm gonna have to charge you.
and Apu Nahasapima Petalan
Okay, don't try anything funny. I'm armed to the teeth.
will buy more Duff to sell to Homer
I would kill everyone in this room for a drop of
and
sweet
Barney.
beer.
So suppose the Duff Brewery builds a factory that's 5 times as big as their initial factory. So they're using 5 times as much land as before. They're using 5 times as many workers as before. They're using 5 times as much equipment, capital, as before. So the cost of their land increases by a multiple of 5. The cost of their workers increases by the same multiple of 5, and so does the cost of their capital. that means that their total cost of making beer will increase by a multiple of 5. Total cost of making the beer with the bigger factory is going to be $136,000. Now, if there are economies of scale, that means the company's output will increase by a larger factor. Suppose that if they build the bigger factory, their output increases by a multiple of 10. So the increased efficiencies from the bigger factory means that their output increases by a multiple of 10. They're able to make 400,000 bottles compared to only 40,000 bottles with the smaller factory. So the resources have increased by a multiple of 5. Their output increases by a multiple of 10. What happens to their average or per unit cost? Average or per unit cost is the total cost divided by the quantity produced. $136,000 divided by 400,000 is 34 cents. And so, because of the economies of scale, where resources increase by a factor of 5 and output increases by a larger multiple, costs per bottle of beer, costs per unit get smaller, and that's the basic principle.